Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday, 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net. So today we're going to hear from Patrick and with Jerry Marzinsky.
Patrick is one of the people that the psychiatric mafia won't let speak. You know, they won't allow them to speak about their truth about what the voices are and how the voices work. They haven't investigated the voices. They haven't done any research on them. They're one of the main primary symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, and they drive this disorder. It's the voices that drive paranoid schizophrenia, not any, fake chemical imbalance that they made up, not any genetic anything. This is a spiritual battle, and the voices are energetic, parasitic entities. So I'll turn that over to Patrick, and he'll bring up some of the patterns they run during his story.
Hey, everybody. My name's Patrick. I have a wilderness survival and medical training company out here in Northwest Montana now, but earlier on in my youth, I should say, I did have I had a stint with the voices, and I've also had all kinds of other demonic, whatever you want to call it. I call them demons, demonic kind of experiences in my life as well. Luckily, I was never in the psychiatric system as far as, being institutionalized or anything like that. I was able to discern that it was spiritual after a time and able to fight them spiritually. And that's kind of how I got out of it. But essentially a quick summary of what happened to me. I grew up in a, pretty well-to-do family. We weren't poor. Mom and dad were married, they stayed married. They're still married. I had a brother, half sister, definitely not the perfect family. Definitely not an example of an abusive or negligent family at all. So pretty, run of the mill upbringing, but I did grow up in a very high crime city where it was just a lot of, bad influences around me. It's Oakland, California, if anyone's familiar with the place. It's why I live in Montana now. I quickly, in my teens, really my pre-teens, I started getting into, the skateboard scene, the punk rock scene, hip hop scene, all those kinds of things. And, with all that comes rebellion and came, alcohol and pot and, it just kind of escalated. And I think a big part of why I allowed it to escalate into my life, I actually ended up, starting to sell pot and sell other drugs like psychedelics and stuff in high school. I think the first time I got arrested selling pot, I must have been 14 years old. Part of the reason why I think I got sucked in is insecurity, maybe a lack of identity. I was always the youngest. Everywhere I went, I think I wanted clout. Maybe I wanted recognition or something like that. And I was always really good at talking and networking. So I quickly, from junior high into high school, and then from high school on, made a lot of connections with, drug dealers and gangsters and stuff like that, and was able to kind of be like a middleman, I call it the white boy liaison, where I would move, drugs to, I had networks in, some of the hip hoppers and the punkers and the skaters. And so I would kind of get drugs from these more, urban, gangster types and kind of just start selling them to a new market for them, really, instead of, their corner markets.
Pat, how old were you when you first started hearing the voices?
I was probably, I must have been 24, 25. So it wasn't until later.
What did you think was going on when they first appeared? And what was it like for you?
Well, it was, so essentially what happened was over time I got hooked on hard drugs. And, it was, I had a battle. I went to college. I had a battle with some opioids because I had a surgery, injury. I got into cocaine, all that stuff, dropped out of college. I was in a, top level college, ended up moving back home. And as far as noticing their voices, this was, a few years after I dropped out of college. I got really heavily into heroin and cocaine. And then that turned into crack cocaine. And it actually kind of started, even when I was a kid, I've always had an internal voice. I know not everyone has that, but when it started kind of becoming abnormal, I was living in a house in North Oakland, and I had just a really paranoid mindset where it was like the cops are coming, I'd be listening at my door, all that stuff, but they didn't manifest it as voices at that time. It wasn't until I got evicted from that apartment and I got moved back into my parents' house, and I was pretty much isolated 24/7, except to go get drugs and except to, if I had to eat, which wasn't a priority for me at all. I was in their room or in my room, and I would just get high all day. And I one day started hearing a party that was on the other side of the fence from my parents' house. And it was like people were having like a bonfire. It was like they were just having a party over there, a barbecue or something like that. And what happened is I started interacting with them. I said, hey, I want to go be a part of this. I want to go have some fun with these people. And we started talking, and I never saw them. It was just kind of over the fence, and they kind of started to gain my trust. And
how long were you talking to them?
It started, with sorry.
Did you go out in the backyard and talk to them, or were you in the room talking to them, or?
Yeah, both. Yeah, I would talk to them in my room. I'd go outside. I'd be talking over the fence, thinking it was coming from over the fence, and they,
Sorry, Patrick. By talking, do you mean communicating kind of mentally?
I thought at the time they were real people.
Right. So you were actually. So if I'd have been observing you, you would have actually been talking to something that wasn't there.
I believe so. It was a long time ago, and I was using a lot of drugs. It was, heroic amounts.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. I believe I was going over there and talking to them. And,
did they answer you back in complete coherent sentences?
Yeah, they were totally having conversations with me, and becoming my friend, quote unquote. And
so it was. You didn't notice anything unusual during those conversations when you first started?
Not at first. No, it was clear to me, especially looking at it now, since I found out about you a few years back and looked at the patterns that you have. It was clear that they were gaining my trust.
Yeah, they start 100%. Off like that, and then they turn on.
What were the sort of conversations, Patrick? What would you be saying to them, just as an example?
Oh, just joking around with them. And then, eventually what it turned into is that they actually would invite me over. And so they would lead me on these excursions around the neighborhood, trying to find the entrance to the party, trying to get in. And then it would just lead me back home. And this is kind of when it started getting more malevolent, I guess. I would get back home, and then they would ridicule me for being so stupid as to think they would let someone like me in their party that was high on drugs all the time and such a loser.
Yeah, that's common. That's common for them to turn on the person once they get their trust.
Right. Yeah. And I actually, I'm trying to find. I did kind of do an exercise with your patterns and kind of wrote some notes on each one. I'm trying to find some of these. Well, one of those is the fostering isolation. They would encourage me just to be doing just copious amounts of drugs, not going out, isolating myself from people, not calling friends.
They want the victim all to themselves, so there's no interference, and that's common. They want them to seal themselves in their bedroom, lock their parents, the friends out, just stay there and listen to their bull crap all day.
Absolutely. And so they really did. They did kind of vie for my trust and get me to trust them. And after a time, I can't remember when that line was, but I did kind of start communicating just in my head. And I, kind of realized this wasn't what I thought it was. It turned out, and then I think very shortly after that phase, they transitioned into, oh, you're actually psychic and you can communicate with other people in the city. And you have these special powers that not everybody has. And so they're trying to make me feel special or something like that. And then they actually ended up trying to convince me I was Jesus at one point, and I think I probably fell for that.
Yeah, that's common too.
Yeah, and they would do things, that, like, you talk about some of the stories with some of the people you've talked to, Jerry, where they would kind of facilitate something, like, or let me know something was going to happen in advance, something I couldn't possibly know, and then it would play out, even if it was something small, like this person's going to like shake their leg and walk over here or something like that, to, whether it was to help me commit crimes or whether it was just to convince me that I had this I guess premonition power. And then I was kind of at that time figuring out that they were kind of as the day went on and the night went on, and the more I'd use, the more they would escalate, the more voices I would start hearing. There were kind of, I would say about like 2 to 5, maybe 2 to 7 voices that were regulars that, like, I knew who they were. But like over time, as the day would go on, it felt like there was 100 people screaming and yelling at me. I mean,
Now,
it was.
did you have a struggle of trying to figure out when this first started, of whether these were your thoughts or belonged to something else?
Well, before they came out as voices, like distinct voices at the bonfire, I think I've always had like, internal voices. It was like, I think it really applies to everyone. I mean, we've all had those thoughts where you're driving down the road. Hey, go veer off into the road, into that ditch. You could do that right now. And you go, why would I do that? Like, that's disgusting.
That's really interesting, Patrick, because that is something that everybody does get.
Yeah.
Right.
And I can really relate to that. And that is strange because it's not your internal voice saying it. It just comes in, doesn't it? And it's definitely not, it's not the sort of internal dialogue that you would normally have.
Yeah,
and I think that's what we need to kind of bring out here, because we've mentioned it a few times, but a few people have asked me about that. And it's definitely something that comes in, and it's very malevolent. That when it's happened to me, it's something that you just wouldn't do.
But it's
something either really dangerous or really detrimental.
But it sounds like your thoughts, but the intent is way different.
For my whole life, and I think everybody relates to that, and especially like things like self-doubt or things like that just come into your head, like you're doing something right, but something's trying to bring you down, and it's a negative reaction that it wants to get. But we don't think of it as anything outside of ourselves, but it used to be something that 100 years ago our ancestors knew this was a spiritual battle. But it wasn't until I think that they had a full hold on me that they came out as actual voices. So it was, it wasn't until that, I call it my bonfire, where they were having the party over the fence, when it turned into voices. And since they've gone away, I was able to fight up, like, guys, I'm not crazy. I make coherent sentences. I've never been admitted to an institution or anything like that. I was able to, with the help of God, spiritually break this stuff. And I live a normal life. A lot of people wouldn't say normal because of where I live and the job that I live, but that I have. But, I'm not crazy. This stuff, by the grace of God and prayer and calling them out and doing what they didn't want me to do, was what changed it all. So, yeah,
that's where the establishment really is screwing people over, because they portray these things as hallucinations. Psychology teaches are hallucinations, psychiatry, the whole medical establishment, other hallucinations. And when you think of hallucinations, it's like, well, they're random, they're garbage, they're word salad. They don't
Well,
make any
also they
sense.
come and go, don't they? And a hallucination will not last for very long.
Right.
So it will
Right.
fade in and out.
So,
And they
so
are
it's a,
very different. Yeah.
yes, it's a complete misconception of what these things actually are. When I realized that when I got working at the state hospital, here's these people walking around, talking to somebody or something in complete coherent sentences, and it was like listening to somebody on one end of a telephone conversation, where they're being answered in complete coherent conversations, but you only could hear half of that.
Yeah.
But the way the establishment portrays these things is like, oh yeah, they're just irrational, crazy, don't make any sense, garbage. No, they speak back in complete sentences. They're very convincing. They're very devious. They're very diabolical. Uh,
I think we've covered that in the Patterns to Voices run as well, Jerry, which is a great paper. And that's the distinction I think we've made in all of our interviews so far. And it's a very important one. It's a very important one because this is where people get confused. And it's quite irritating at times because they come in with something that is not relevant. They're not talking about what we're talking about. And that, I think, that distinction always has to be reinforced. I think it's really important. So it's good that we've done that. Yes.
Yeah, if you're going to recover from this, you have to make a distinction between your thoughts and theirs. And
Yes.
theirs are constantly negative against yourself and everybody else. They're telling you things to do that are not your intention, so their intention is different. They don't want to be discovered as something separate from you. The patients I've had at the state hospital who asked them, who are you? What are you? They'll say, we are you. They want to masquerade as you. They want you to believe that they are you and that these thoughts that they're injecting into your head belong to you and that you should act on them because you're special or you're under threat or they make up something. But they're consistent liars. They lie about everything.
I was going to say about those patterns, when I think when they came out as voices, they had me in a stranglehold so much they didn't need to pretend they were my voices. They were pretending they were other, because I was like really, I was in a dark place, and I don't think they needed to. They just wanted to humiliate me and draw as much negativity. So something about the patterns is all the different voices, especially the ones that were regulars in my that were tormenting me, they each had their own MO. Each voice had its own kind of thing it liked to play off of. And it was
how many were there, Patrick? Do you know how many were?
I would say the regulars, there were between like 2 and 7, depending on the day and stuff. And it felt like it was 100 by the end of the night that they were just screaming at me. But they all had, their own MO, but they also had a cohesive and mutual objective, I would say. And so an example is before I found out, and towards the end, when I actually broke the spell of it, I found out that they were demons. I called them imps at the time, but before that, I thought I was psychic and I was communicating with others in the city. And there was a couple examples of stuff of their kind of cohesive objective that they all followed is torment. So at one point they convinced me I was psychic, and I would keep using, and then they would convince me that I was so out of control with my psychic ability because of the drug use and because it was too powerful that I was actually intruding on other people's lives. And these people were, the voices would scream out in agony, or I'd be intruding on their private lives or something. They're in their bedroom changing, and I was watching them or something through my psychic ability. I mean, it was really, and it would make me spiral and go crazy because I was just like, how can I control this power inside of me and all this stuff? And then another example of how they are kind of separate and have a different MO, each one. I mean, I believe they are all different spirits with different abilities and stuff. One of the kind of funnier ones that I think back now and it kind of makes me laugh is there's one that would try to create confusion in me. And what he would do is all the other voices would be really loud and he would be like kind of off in the distance. And so they told me, oh, he's just further away from you right now. He's just one of the people that you're communicating with that's further away. And I'd be like, what's your name? And he'd tell me and I could barely hear it. And it'd be like, Dwayne Wayne was the guy's name. And I'd be like, oh, Dwayne Wayne. He's like, no, Dane Wiggin. And he would keep changing it so that I couldn't, hear him and just to mess with me. And he just kept changing his name until I would become confused. And I couldn't trust my thoughts anymore. It was really, it was quite distressing. It's funny now because, you could almost see that as a prank in like a movie or something like that. But
yeah, but it's not funny at the time.
It's not when it's in your head. No, absolutely.
No. Now, Pat, after they would gang up on you like that, did you feel your energy level drop down to almost nothing?
So that was one of the patterns that I saw, and it's hard for me to say for that one because I was on really ridiculous amounts of drugs. So it wasn't uncommon for me, middle of the night, wake up, face down in the desk, after passing out or something like that. So probably played a role in it, but yeah, again, I can't say for sure on that pattern. But yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of gaslighting, a lot of stuff like that. But I do have to say, there's it is a spiritual war, meaning there's evil forces, but there's also righteous forces too. And the righteous forces, or my guardian angels, or whatever you want to call it, played a huge part in it, in healing me.
What did they do?
How did you become aware of them, Patrick? Because obviously the drug thing can be really negative, especially on the come down from it.
Yeah.
How did you actually get in touch with these other beings that were more positive?
Well, it was kind of, so for my research, the dark ones impose themselves. The light ones want you to call for help. Right.
Yes.
So I believe when I was really in it, this was by the time I'd figured out, I went through the psychic phase. I went through the, these are the federal government and they've tapped my brain and my vehicle and have speakers all over the place. Then it went into, I called them imps. And I actually found, and I don't want to get too off track of your question, but I actually found a hierarchy because when I would start battling them, they'd call in their overlords that actually had names. And
that's really interesting. Do you remember any of the names of these? Because
yeah, the one I remember most was her name was Helena Handbasket. And she was like, she kind of played off of like sexual vices and stuff like that. She was very attached to that kind of part of the spiritual realm. There were some other
sorry, Patrick, were they in a way archetypal in that a lot of these demonic entities, they have different manifestations within different belief systems? So you've got like Hecate and Lilith and these kind of demonic entities which are known. They're actually definitely archetypes, and they're a certain type of entity. Did you actually come into contact with anything like that?
So I actually believe the voices, the ones that are in our heads, is one principality, I would say, of these voices. And I can talk about it later if we have time, but I've experienced other principalities of demonic presences as well after the voices kind of went away. But I think the ones I experienced were more low level, less intelligent, more tricksters. That's why I called them imps. But I certainly did see, I definitely saw, like with some of this, I called them sergeants or overlords or something like that. The ones they would call in if they got frustrated with me. They had names. They played off certain vices, like a lot of the, demonic hierarchical classifications. They are part, some of them have a different demon attached to a different 7 deadly sin or something like that. So yeah, I did see that. I don't think I got all the way up to the Hecate Lilith level with the ones I experienced. thank God. You know, I think that could be more like a possession type of deal.
Well, there's also this concept that they can be kind of set upon you. They can be attached to you. And that's more like a sort of black magic belief system. But these lower level ones that I've been discussing with Jerry, that's how we actually got in touch, are exactly as you're saying. And we heard that from someone else we were talking to recently, Jerry, didn't we? That they're like irritants, really. They're kind of minor irritants, but they're incredibly omnipresent and insistent. So that seems to be quite a common thread, doesn't it, Jerry?
Yeah, they want to generate negative emotional energy. They want you in a negative emotional state, and then they drain it. And I have no idea how they drain the person's energy, but there are levels to them. I ran into that with the patients I worked with. You know, just like you said, Patrick, when the lower ones weren't making any more progress, or we had thrown them out, then came in the next level, like the sergeants or somebody like that. They'd come in and they were stronger, more, you know, evil and more vociferous. But yeah, there are levels to them. And how did you come about to know that there was a light side, or there were positive spirits?
Yeah, I was just going to get back to that.
That's important to know, because they won't help unless you ask them to. They're not allowed to interfere, you know, with your free will. And if it's your free will to listen to these things, then they have to stand there and watch you be tormented.
Yeah.
And at what point, Patrick, did this actually happen? Was it something that you were consciously aware of, that a thought came into your mind that could probably be a possibility, or was there something else? Did some kind of divinity open up? What happened?
It was kind of both.
Right.
So by the time I'd kind of figured out this was more of a demonic spiritual entities that were tormenting me, I was so caught in this loop of drug use and the voices. It was every day the same thing over and over again. And one day I think I was just suffering so much that I just like broke down and like called out for help. You know, I didn't know to who. I believe I was never raised in the church. I never went to church and never read a Bible my entire life, but I've always been God-fearing in a way, just intuitively. And so I think that some of the seeds planted before my drug use and during kind of just caused me to cry out. And I did. And at that night, I actually I had a vision, and it was like a big beam of light. It was in the shape of a cross. And something I always knew I was going to be drawn towards Christ, but that was like the moment where I was like, and it was like powerful. I mean, all the voices were gone after that. And it was, you know, it was, I mean, the voices that night were gone. It wasn't an overnight type of thing where it went away, but yeah,
Did
it was
you
powerful.
Did you see it in a dream, or did you see it before your eyes?
I was awake and I saw it, and it knocked me on my butt. And
how big was it?
I mean, it was the kind of thing where it was like everything whited out. So like my peripherals were gone, and it was just a big cross of light just kind of in my vision. I don't know if it was something that was so powerful in my mind's eye that it just kind of projected there, if it was like right here in the foreground or what, but I saw it and I couldn't see anything else. And and so at that point was kind of when things started to turn around. Every night after that, I'd be laying in bed and I would be, you know, trying to, the imps would be kind of betting me. They would be like, you'll never stop. This is you now. You're a loser. You're going to be doing this every day. And I would say, no, that's not true. And I'd break the pipe that night. Mm-hmm. And I'd go wake up the next morning and buy a new pipe. And then I'd do it all over again. And then one night I had this tug of war going on inside of me. And there's a time later that I felt this same tug of war happen again, but it was like, they were tormenting me saying, you're never getting clean. You're going to be a loser forever, all these things. And then there was something else inside of me that was pulling like, no, show them what you can do, you know, show them how strong you can be and stuff like that. And it was an encouraging kind of warm feeling that was like this tug of war between the evil voices. And eventually I was like, I didn't make any bets. I didn't bet my soul or anything, thank God. But it was like, I bet you I can stop for a week. And so I broke the pipe that night. I didn't ever do it again. I never got high again. I never smoked crack ever again. And so from then, I got really into, and the voices very soon after went away. And it was probably only a 6-month period that I heard the voices.
Yeah, it's
it was
very
very short.
important to people understand that they have at least 2 guardian angels around them all the time. They
Yeah.
can't help it unless they ask for it. They're
It's
not
funny.
allowed to interfere.
It's funny you say that, Jerry, because in the Bible, aside from the archangels and some of the higher levels of angels, more of the ground level angels, they appear in the Bible very often in pairs. Very often in pairs. And so I think that rings true with me. And I think that's definitely, I would say you probably have I would say we all have a couple of guardian angels, and I believe those were what were guiding me, and they still do in a lot of ways, and they still protect me. And I certainly believe call me like a crypto Calvinist or something like that, but I think a lot of us are chosen for this path, like for their specific path, and to be drawn to God and all these things, because man, I should be dead. I can think of 100 times where I shouldn't be alive right now. And by the grace of God, I was saved through it. I mean, I should have overdosed dozens and dozens of times. I mean, it was ridiculous. But I didn't. And I was drawn to Christ, and it took a while. And I eventually got into self-sufficiency, and I got into, and, as getting into an old passion of mine when I was a kid, I wanted to be in the military. And so I started, really getting into a very intense exercise regimen. I was trying to go into special forces, unfortunately. And fortunately, now that I know what the whole war machine is all about, mm-hmm. I'm glad I didn't get in. But unfortunately for me, then I was pretty broken up. I never got in. But that's something, one of your patterns is how do you put it? Aversion to anything positive or beautiful, I would say, is probably the one. There's a few of them, but that kind of go along those lines. But
yes,
doing things like physical activity, like intense exercise, building up your body, building up your mind, painting, whatever it is you like to do. Prayer is at the time when I was hearing the voices, I was in such a negative loop. There was no way I was doing any of that stuff. But by the time I decided to get clean, what was so powerful was, physical exercise, having a goal, really staying busy, adding more to your routine all the time, just creating a strong structure, because it's, God is structure, and then, the devil is chaos. Right. So that was huge. And I, unfortunately, when I was hearing the voices, I didn't have a chance to experiment with anything religious, as far as like the 23rd Psalm, like you recommend, Jerry. But I can tell you that it was a religious experience that turned everything around. And since then, since the voices went away, my faith has been a huge spiritual warfare weapon for me, as well as hobbies and staying busy and having goals. And I'm fortunate. I had a short stint with this type of demon specifically. I'm fortunate for that. I thank God every day that I was, saved from that experience. And it's, I'm not mentally ill, and they never made me violent. I believe humiliation was enough for them, because I was killing myself, with the drugs, and I was humiliating myself constantly. So I think I was just a wellspring of negative emotion for them, where they didn't need to cause me to harm anybody or kill anybody or anything like that, or kill myself or whatever.
Now, didn't you say at one time they came through your girlfriend at night?
So this, I believe, is a different type of demon. So I hadn't, when I got clean, it was almost a decade ago now. That the voices went away. It's been a long time, so it is hard for me to recall some of these and put them in chronological order. But since then, about 2 or 3 years ago, I started seeing this woman, and I told her about my experiences, and she said, "Oh, have you heard of Jerry Marzinsky?" And I hadn't thought about the voices for a long time. I almost categorized them in the basement of my mind as, just a psychosis. I knew in my heart it wasn't. But then she introduced me to some of your interviews, Jerry, and I watched a bunch of them. I think the first one was the one on Freeman, and then I read your book, and I was like, I feel vindicated. I've known this the whole time, that this is something outside of myself. I didn't just go crazy for 6 months and then I wasn't crazy all of a sudden. And it wasn't, and these were things that were intelligent and all these things. So that kind of started coming back, and my faith, I kind of got to a new level in my faith at that point. Started, and because it's a walk, it's a journey. You don't immediately become righteous, and we're never totally righteous. But I started elevating and praying more and doing more scripture at that point, doing more research. Ended up going into, I was a wildland firefighter for a few years, and ended up experiencing some things at the bunkhouse that was built back in the 30s on Indian land. And so that was different. But before my last year, I had bought this house I'm in now in Montana. And my girlfriend at the time, who introduced me to you, after that fire season, she helped me to move here. And we moved here, and I hadn't experienced voices, anything, besides the normal, self-doubt, negative thoughts, things that, we think of as normal, but we got here, and one night, maybe a week or two after we moved here, we were laying in bed, we were sleeping, and I wake up and I am held down in the bed and I can't move. And I will say I had some sleep paralysis experiences right when I got sober a decade ago. But this was, years and years later. I hadn't had any real notable incidents, and I was held down and the bed was shaking. It was like someone grabbed the headboard and was shaking the bed back and forth, and I couldn't move and I couldn't speak. And I was able to finally, I kind of turned my head like this to look at her, and she was laying next to me, and she had her eyes closed, but she was breathing in a way that was abnormal. It was very deep and very fast, like I forget what they call it. I have to recall my
hyperventilation.
EMT. Yeah, it was like a hyperventilation, but very deep and very fast. So like it was a Kuzmal or a Shane Stokes breathing or something like that. I digress. But she's breathing in this way, just like, and I turned to her and I said, "Do you feel that?" And I won't say her name here. I will call her Rita. I said, "Do you feel that, Rita?" And she turns to me and opens her eyes, and they're like black eyes, and goes, "I'm not Rita," in a completely demonic voice. And I could barely move. I could barely talk. I was only able to get out. I don't want to curse on the show if it's a family show, but F you, basically. I said, F off. And, really woke myself out of it after that, wrenched myself out of the paralysis. And at that point, I knew about the 23rd Psalm and how it was powerful. I started trying to recite it, and this force was trying to pull me back into sleep while I was saying the 23rd Psalm. And then this is the second time I felt that tug of war. This thing started pulling me the other way, trying to keep me awake, keep my mouth moving, keep my vocal cords working. It was like this tension inside me. And I was able to finally get that psalm out, and I was buzzing with energy. I mean, like, it felt like there was just like, I don't know, like I drank a pitcher of like, espresso or something like it was like this energy was coming out of me. And I finally finished it. And I like was able to just kind of like, I kind of dropped to the bed, and she's like, "What's going on?" My girlfriend at the time. And she goes, "What's going on?" I'm like, I just had like the craziest experience ever. And she's like, "You're 200 degrees right now." Like I have a giant king size bed. She could feel the heat coming off of my body. from that, whatever that was, the energy. And I told her all about it. And so there was that experience that was very intense. And then she had left. We kind of ended our relationship, and she left, and we're still cool, but we're just not together. And I've had a bunch of other experiences, but one of the notable ones was I woke up paralyzed, and something was that I could see with my eyes. It was a woman in the shape of a shadow. It was like a shadow woman trying to mount me to have sex with me. And I was able to actually throw her off of me and pull myself out of it. But I actually, that was a kind of a creepy one. And they've gotten less and less because I've been doing a lot of learning and about, spiritual warfare weapons and different prayers to say and anointing my house and casting out demons. I've been, I did the first podcast I ever did a few months back, maybe mid last year, maybe July, August or something like that. And it was, that kind of opened things up for me I kind of opened myself for people to reach out if they've had any experiences with any of this type of stuff, they need help. And I really got into researching stuff. So I've really started to build up an arsenal on different ways to cast these things out and stuff. And so things have pretty much gotten to nothing here at this house. But from the research I've done, and I know in Islam, they have a type of demon or jinn, some people call it, where they actually inhabit vacated homes or or desolate places. And so I'm out here in the middle of the woods. And when I bought this house, the sellers moved out, and I spent an entire California fire season in Northern California. And so it was vacated for 8 to 9 months before I moved in. And so I think something made its home here. And eventually I've been able to like cast it out, and maybe it was more than one thing because it felt like those two things were different. One thing I have had, it's been a while, but they would start kind of manipulating my dreams more so than waking me up and paralyzing me. But I can feel when the switch turns on, when they enter my dreams and they start making things really eerie, and I can start feeling things physically in my dreams. One of the ones that I remember, is I was looking at my phone, and I don't know why, but I'm sitting in the back of a car in this dream, and this like grasshopper comes out of the screen, and it's walking on the screen, and I pick up the grasshopper, and I don't know what prompted me to do it, but I decided I was going to break the grasshopper in half with my fingers, but I couldn't. And all of a sudden I start feeling my fingers being bent by the grasshopper, bent back. I feel it in real life, like they're trying to break my fingers off, and I could feel it in my sleep, and I eventually kind of woke myself out of it. And it's been a while since I've had any experiences like that, but I've had some where it was like, the dream gets really vivid and eerie, and then you kind of wake yourself out of it, and then I can feel something kind of tapping on my back physically, like as I'm waking up out of that sleep. So I think they kind of get the idea that I can't be messed with like I used to be able to. I have the protection of the Lord and the Holy Spirit, and so they just try to do things to scare me. When this first happened at this house, I mean, I almost wet myself. It was so scary, but now that doesn't scare me at all. I think one of the big things that is having trust, having faith. And, what really works for them is mockery, because these are,
they don't like that.
These are sensitive beings. Think of someone in your life who treats you like garbage, or who's just a cruel person, or who's, just a toxic person to be around. They don't like being ridiculed. They'd rather project that out on somebody else. So
that's one of the things I tell all my patients is mock them, make fun of them. They hate it.
Yep. It works all the time. I mean, I'm lucky. I've come with this arsenal because I really don't experience much anymore. Sometimes I can sense or see things approaching the house. I've always had a sixth sense of, and I think a lot of people can relate. Like, you know, you have that one stair in your house when you go up it from the basement, you can feel something watching you, kind of stuff like that. I've always had those kind of I'm sensitive to those kind of energies and things. But I think those aren't just feelings; those are real entities that are around us, and they do that on purpose to creep you out. And that is something I actually forgot to mention earlier in my story. When I was hearing the voices, I would see shadow figures as well. And I believe them to be two separate principalities of demons.
Yeah, I think they are too, but I'm not sure what they are. The shadow, three-dimensional shadows, darker than the rest of the room.
Yeah, and they have bright eyes.
Well, either the eyes are either red or lime green.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and if they can see the eyes, they're in much worse shape than if they don't see the eyes.
Yeah, and so
I actually use that as a clinical tool.
Yeah, so I would see them visually, and I would also see them in my mind's eye, like they'd appear to me approaching my bedroom or something like that at that time. Now, when I saw the female one trying to mount me years later, she didn't have eyes. It was just like a shadow. And from what a lot of the research I've done with that, you know, at least the original one with my ex-girlfriend could have been like a night hag or something like that. But the one that tried to mount me seemed like what they would call a succubus. And,
Yes,
you know, cause there's a lot of lore on that. And there's a lot of, there's some lore that says the incubus, which is the male version, and the succubus are the same, but they shapeshift. So they mount a male to get the seed, and then they turn male and then implant it into a female human to make more of themselves. I've read that, can't confirm it at all, but it is interesting to think about.
it's a very well-known phenomenon.
Yeah. These shadows. Yeah, it was very creepy. I was able to it felt like I physically threw it off of me, which was bizarre. But like, this wasn't one of those things where it was like I mentally saw it. Like, I was awake, but I couldn't move, but I was able to just kind of, like, I don't know if I screamed and threw her off at the same time, but it was a physical thing. Like, I felt like I grabbed her and like threw her.
But it works equally well mentally, I think, with things like that. I've encountered them before, but it's a mental battle, and they're trying to suck you in as well.
Yeah.
There's one that I experienced was basically sucking my energy, you know, drawing my energy so much that it's trying to draw me into a black hole.
Yeah.
And these things are, they are archetypal, but a lot of people don't actually experience them at all, do they? This is what I find really interesting about this, that some people just think it's absolutely ridiculous because they don't seem to encounter any of it. So it does seem as though they're attracted to certain situations.
Well, I think
and
it's
certain things within people. Yeah.
I think it's strategic, though,
yes,
because I think it's clear with what you and Jerry talk about, how the psychiatric mafia, they want to cover this stuff up. They don't want people to know what it really is. Yes. It's something we did know 100 years ago. Our great-grandparents, our grandparents probably knew all about this stuff, but they've done a real heck of a job turning it into mental illness and turning it, and they do the same thing with, you know, what's mainstream and what's not mainstream. So I think they strategically affect certain people because the fact that it's only a small number of people, meaning, oh, you're not normal if you experience this kind of thing. Yes. So if that makes sense. So I think
I think also that it seems that when you are doing something which is actually putting some real positivity, or it's something really useful, they are attracted to that because they certainly don't want it to happen.
That is something that is so true. Yeah. I mean, one of the sayings, there's this guy, he's a Christian guy on YouTube or whatever, and one of the things he says a lot is new levels, new devils. And so basically when you're reaching new heights in your faith, in your life, They don't care about the guy that's off, at the, porn theater, shooting up drugs and whatever, this and that. They got him where they want him. They don't want God to have more of his army. They want to bring down the people that are especially the ones that are just beginning to turn their lives around. They are really adamant about pulling them back and inserting stumbling blocks into their lives and things like
exactly.
Since I had that one podcast I was talking about earlier, a bunch of people reached out to me, and I actually had a guy, and I don't want to get too into anything personal, but gentleman who he has he has 3 sons and grew up in the church and raises his children very, very biblically, very sheltered from a lot of the mainstream stuff. And they're working on his kids like crazy, these devils. And I told him, I was like, there's a reason for that. It's because you're doing what they don't want you to do. And you're doing important work. You're raising new children a different way than you may have been raised. You're raising them in a better way. They don't want more of God's soldiers. They want people on their side. They don't, because it makes them less powerful when they have people opposing them. And so I told him, you can't let this hardship in your life. And it's also a test from God, because, in the Bible, God created everything, including these evil creatures. So you got to look at it as more of a test. Like in Job, he was suffering so much, yet he never forsake God. And so you can't let these hardships in your life make you stumble. You can't, they set a trap for you. You have to step into the trap in order to actually be trapped by that trap. So
you're right on. Positive attracts negative. So the more positive you become, the more negative things start coming into your life. That's the way it works with electricity and all kinds of energy. It's, the negative pole flows into the positive pole.
Can I talk about electricity?
Sure. For it.
Yeah. There's, I don't mean to change the subject too much, but I mean, I could talk about this stuff forever. These, at least certain principalities of these demonic entities, spirits, whatever you want to call them, influence electricity like you've never seen. I know you guys are aware of that.
Happens on our broadcasts all the time. There's always, electronic interference.
Well, they are electricity, aren't they? These energies are
they are
force of electricity. That's basically the whole idea of the electric universe, and the whole concept of how the whole system works. It works on an energetic principle.
Right. And it takes an energetic therapy to get rid of them. Pouring these toxic psychiatric drugs on top of them doesn't get rid of them. It's like pouring, Thorazine on a big magnet, expecting the magnetic field to disappear. They don't operate in physical reality. There is no time, there is no space, there is no matter where they're at. So they can follow these guys anywhere to the end of the earth. They can appear anywhere instantly. They're not physical. You can't treat them with physical medicines. All that does
is certainly not attached to a geographical location. No.
I believe there's some that are. I think
that's what I was going to get into, actually, Patrick, because that's where I think you said something really interesting about the house that was the attraction for them, or they had been hanging around there, because these low-level entities that can't leave, or for some reason, like ghosts, they don't know they're dead and they're trapped, or they want to go back to the pub because it's the only place they ever went to. They're different from the demonic realm. But this other level of what we're talking about is quite a lot more serious. And then we get to these archetypes, and they are real demons, aren't they? There is a demonic realm. Yes.
They hate the human race, and they specifically hate kids. They hate babies because they're closest to God.
Yep.
So, you look at what's happening with all these pedophiles now, destroying kids' lives from an early age on.
And it's demons that are causing them to be that way as well.
Yeah.
And so that's very interesting, Mark. I have a different view on it, I think, than you. I do think that even the low level ones, I think they are demonic. I think they're kind of the minion level.
Yes, I was talking about ghosts, Patrick, rather
Yeah,
than
so
demonic
ghosts
entities.
are I'm not sure about ghosts yet. I haven't come to my own conclusions yet, because I do hear some really touching stories about people connecting with loved ones and they swear it's real, and I can't, I got to take it at face value with what I've experienced.
That's more like the spiritualist side, isn't it? That's kind of a different thing again.
Yeah.
I think I mean, I'm talking about, like you can actually see apparitions appearing, and I've noticed that with them, that sometimes they stay there for a long time. It's not like the ghosts just kind of appear and disappear. Sometimes the apparition is there for a long time. I remember seeing a table of quarrymen in a house that I used to live in, and it was like about 4 or 5 in the morning. It was just starting to get light outside, but they were there and they didn't go away until the room was fully light. So that was like an imprint of a memory.
Yeah, so, I've heard about that as well. It's hard for me to say. I think a lot of the I feel like ghosts and spirits certainly exist. Or I know spirits exist. I don't know about ghosts necessarily, because in my belief system, it's more like when you pass on, you go somewhere. Maybe some people stick around. I don't know. I can't confirm.
Well, I think the concept is that there's people who maybe die in accidents and they don't know they're dead, so they don't know, they can't move on. And this seems to be a case with people who experience going into a death type situation. In other words, it can be a coma, or somebody actually died. And he wrote a book about this. Several books that are available on this, of people that have actually gone over to the other side, been pronounced dead and been brought back. And basically they describe it. At first, it's a bit of a struggle to get out of this realm. So basically they have to strive to get out to the next stage. And I think that kind of makes sense in a way, because it makes sense with the reality that we experience also.
Yeah, I think that could be very well true. I tend to think that there's plenty of experiences people have had with ghosts. I tend to think the poltergeist stuff, the mischievous stuff, is more demonic, even if it's more lighthearted. And so, and you actually asked a question earlier on about things being attached, which I wanted to bring up too. So I think these are all, like I said, different principalities, different hierarchies. There's different levels, different abilities, different domains that they inhabit. But there's also something I've become very aware of from after my so I really started researching this stuff, is familiar spirits. And in the Bible, familiar spirit, it says beware. And so basically what a familiar spirit is, something that is attached to you or your generation, like your familial generation, that gets passed down, and they have access, like actually Jerry talks about with the voices, they have access to your entire, not just memory, but your family line.
Yeah, I've worked with some patients that have those, and they're difficult to get rid of. Yeah, because they extend back a long way.
I tend to think I have some, or I had some, and they follow lines, and they know all about you, and sometimes they masquerade as a loved one, or they masquerade as a like a spirit guide. A lot of people say they have a spirit guide. I tend to think, and most of the accounts that I've listened to and talked to people about, it was, it gave me all these abilities and all these things, and then one day it flipped and things started turning into hell.
So the demonic entities, they're not spirit. The word spirit guide came out of the New Age, really, and it's a complete misinterpretation of this whole order that we've been talking about, in my opinion.
And so be very careful with those.
I agree. I mean, I think it's very dangerous. I've had a lot of friends, because I started talking about this topic, would reach out to me. I think I have the spirit guide. I was like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not a professional exorcist. Maybe one day, but I'm going to give you my advice, and that is stay away from that spirit guide.
Well, I've seen and experienced people who've said they've had these spirit guides, and someone I knew a long time ago, she'd actually drew it, and I thought, that looks very dodgy to me. It doesn't look like somebody full of positive energy and somebody who's going to guide you anywhere decent, you know. And she was getting possessed. She was getting possessed. So it's a massive field, and I think we've done really well to get it within an hour.
Perfect.
I'd like to thank you for that, Patrick. That was absolutely excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
Cheers. Thanks.
Cheers.
Okay. Take care.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World Live.